I was trying to find some evidence that people are holding Bitcoin for longer and longer. And I came across this chart here. This is the 1 year plus hold on for dear life chart. What this shows you is how much Bitcoin is put into an address and then it's not spent for 1 or more years. So just the surface level understanding of this should be this shows you how many people are using Bitcoin to save for 1 or more year. How many people expect that Bitcoin will have value a year or more from today? And it seems like over time, this number keeps going up. So more and more people seem to think that Bitcoin will have value in the future. Now let's take a look at some of these percentages. So in January of 2011, the 1 year hodl wave was 27.5%. If we go to January 2016, we see here it's up to 61%. If we go to September of 2020, it's now up to 63.4%. And in November of 2023, it seems to have peaked around 70.5%. It's clear that we can see there are higher highs over time, but there are also higher lows. So we can see in July of 2011, the 1 year hodl wave, the low was around 28%, 27% or so. In March of 2014, it was up to 35.6%. And again, it went to a high, then it came back down. Again, it went to a high, it came back down in May of 2018, and it was down to 41.1%. So here, the low was higher than the high here. And now if we go to the next low, we can see November of 2021, it was 53.8%. And it seems like we may have formed a bottom here. I don't know for sure. I don't know. Maybe this could go lower, but it seems like we've formed a bottom here. And the 1 year hodl wave, the number of people who are willing to hold their Bitcoin for 1 or more years, has bottomed at 61.9%, which is significantly higher than the peak set in April of 2011. We can also take a look at the 2 year hodl chart, 2+ year hodl chart. We can see at one point it was at zero, then it went all the way up to 30.4% in 2013, then it went all the way up to 47% in 2017, then it went to 47% again in 2020, then it jumped up to 57.2% in 2023. We can see a similar trend with the 3 year hodl chart. At one point it was at zero, then it went to 36.5%, then it went to 46.2%. I found another pretty interesting chart that actually shows you every single hodl wave. Over time, it seems like maybe the 3 to 6 month holders are decreasing, and instead they're holding for longer and longer. The short term Bitcoin holdings numbers are decreasing, and the long term ones are increasing. So we can see at the very top, 8 to 10 years, I believe, 8 years or more. We can see it's at 9.92% in 2018, and today it's at 19.74%. It's almost at 20%. So just another conclusion that you can build from this chart is that it seems like more and more people are holding their Bitcoin for longer and longer. Over time, the 0 day to 1 day people move to 1 day to 1 week. Then the 1 day to 1 week people turn into 1 week to 1 month. Then the 1 month to 3 months people turn into 3 months to 6 months, and so on. And the people who hold Bitcoin for longer and longer periods keep increasing. I don't know how intentional this is. Maybe these are lost wallets. Maybe all of these people are planning to dump their Bitcoin over the next year, over the next 6 months. I don't know. But what I see here based on this trend is that people are holding their Bitcoin for longer and longer. Less Bitcoin is being held for shorter periods of time, meaning fewer and fewer Bitcoin are becoming available for sale. More and more people are locking away their Bitcoin, they're putting it away, and they're never touching it again. What happens to the price of a finite commodity when people want to hold it for longer and longer and longer? What happens if nobody is willing to sell for US dollars? What happens when governments, financial institutions, individuals start borrowing US dollars, start going short on the US dollar to go long on Bitcoin? And all of them plan to hold that Bitcoin for longer and longer as they learn more about it. I don't know what's going to happen to Bitcoin's price over the next week, month, year, 2 years, but I do know that the number of people who aren't willing to sell their Bitcoin is constantly increasing, and people are holding their Bitcoin for longer and longer over time. Fewer and fewer people are going to be willing to sell their Bitcoin for US dollars because US dollars are a complete scam. As more people figure out that the US dollar is a scam and that Bitcoin is the future of money, I think they're going to move their wealth from the legacy assets like stocks, real estate, bonds into Bitcoin. And they're going to hold Bitcoin just like they held their real estate for 20 years, just like they held their stock for 20 years, just like they held their bonds for the last 10 years. 17% of Bitcoin has been held for 10 or more years. And if we look at this number in 5, 10, 15 years, I wouldn't be surprised if it's up to 25, 30, 40%. So when people buy Bitcoin and they put it away forever, the price has to go up to incentivize them to sell their Bitcoin. But a lot of these people aren't willing to sell. They don't want US dollars. They don't want paper money. They want to hold on to Bitcoin. They want the best asset in the world to save their life's earnings. This is just a basic supply and demand chart. The demand is in red and the supply is in blue. The y axis is the price and the quantity is the x axis. The equilibrium is the price at which demand and supply meet. Bitcoin is an asset with unlimited demand. There's infinite demand for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is also an asset with a finite supply. So over time, as more people demand Bitcoin, they're going to have to offer more dollars to bring more Bitcoin to the market. And this is why I always say that Bitcoin runs out at every single price. Over time, we're going to see that as more people are putting away Bitcoin for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, 15 years. We're going to see charts with 15-year holding periods in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. But over time, as more people are holding their Bitcoin and never selling again, the price keeps going up. The price has to keep going up because the people who want Bitcoin have to convince those people to sell their Bitcoin. They have to convince those people to give away their Bitcoin for US dollars or for whatever they really want. We can see this happening with houses as well. The price of Bitcoin in terms of housing is constantly increasing. You're able to buy more houses with your Bitcoin over time. At one point, a house cost 63,000 Bitcoin. Today, a house costs something like 5 Bitcoin. So if you saved that 63,000 Bitcoin in 2011 and you bought houses today with that same Bitcoin, you'd be able to get something like 10,000 houses. The difference between Bitcoin and housing is that Bitcoin is the best asset in the world. Nobody can manipulate the supply. Nobody can increase how much Bitcoin exists. On the other hand, the supply of housing can rise forever. More and more houses can be added to the market if there's ever an increase in demand. So let's say, for example, this demand curve moves over to the right. The price is going to increase and more supply is going to be added to the economy. With Bitcoin, the only thing that can happen is if demand were to increase and the price goes up, the people who own Bitcoin can sell it for whatever the price is. Let's say they have the price of US dollars. People who own Bitcoin can sell it for US dollars. But if there's a finite quantity of something and the people who own it aren't willing to sell, then the price has to keep going up and up and up until somebody is finally willing to sell what they have. In the case of Bitcoin, there's always going to be supply because you can sell smaller and smaller amounts, but we're going to still see people who want, let's say, 1 Bitcoin, 2 Bitcoin, 5 Bitcoin, 10 Bitcoin. And to get those quantities, they're not going to be able to find them all at once. They're going to have to buy over time. If the US government wants to buy 1 million Bitcoin, they can set up buys of, let's say, 500 Bitcoin a day until they have their 1 million Bitcoin. If they put in a market order to buy all 1 million Bitcoin right away, they're going to drain all of the exchanges, they're going to skyrocket the price, and they're going to get dumped on by people who have Bitcoin on the sidelines. This is partly why I think there's not going to be a supply shock anymore. I think that Bitcoin is going to have a strong foundation of people who are willing to hold for longer and longer over time as they learn how Bitcoin works. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. We're going to see the 1 year hodl wave go to like 80, 90%, but it's going to take some time. People don't understand how Bitcoin works overnight. It takes a lot of time and dedication and thousands of hours of learning. In the meantime, we're going to see a lot of people trying to manipulate the market price of Bitcoin. So, for example, Caroline Ellison and Sam Bankman Fried were trying to keep Bitcoin's price below $20,000. And Take a look at the price now, $85,591. So they were trying to keep Bitcoin's price below 20,000. They went bankrupt, and now Bitcoin has popped. The issue with manipulating an asset like Bitcoin is that if you end up being wrong, you're going to lose everything, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So, for example, FTX and Alameda both seem to have gone bankrupt because they were trying to manipulate Bitcoin's price. Of course, there are going to be people who can manipulate Bitcoin in the short term. They have enough money, they have enough time, they have enough energy and resources to do it. But over the long term, because we know that people are buying Bitcoin and they're holding it for longer and longer, it's much harder to keep Bitcoin's price below a certain level. So let's say during the previous bull market, Sam Bankman-Fried and Caroline Ellison tried to keep Bitcoin's price below $20,000. If Bitcoin's price did go below $20,000, there's going to be more and more people who are willing to buy whatever they can get their hands on. There's a finite amount of Bitcoin available for you to manipulate the market with. To keep the price down, what Sam Bankman-Fried and Caroline Ellison were doing is they were selling their customers Bitcoin and they were putting it in random shitcoins. They ran out of Bitcoin to sell. They could no longer manipulate the market, and Bitcoin's price popped right back above $20,000. Right now, we have a massive whale who has a short position on Bitcoin with 40 times leverage. So, what they're doing is they're essentially just gambling. They're putting their money into this exchange, they're shorting Bitcoin, and they used leverage to get into that position. So 40 times leverage means, let's say they have a $100,000 position, they would have put $2,500 into that position of their own money. They would have borrowed 97% of the trade value. So if Bitcoin's price rises 3 to 4%, they're going to be liquidated. This person also had a bigger leveraged long position on Bitcoin. So what they were doing is they borrowed money again to buy Bitcoin to go long. Bitcoin whales manipulate the market by dumping Bitcoin into the market when there's low liquidity. So let's say ETFs are shut down, ETFs aren't buying, MicroStrategy isn't buying Bitcoin. So what they do is they dump a bunch of Bitcoin into the market at the market price on a weekend. And then Bitcoin's price drops, a bunch of leveraged traders get liquidated, and Bitcoin's price keeps falling. Eventually, what I think is going to happen is that there's going to be a perpetual bid for Bitcoin from these massive institutions, from these governments, and they're going to buy the Bitcoin that these whales are selling into the market at the market price. At some point, these whales are going to make a decision that ends up bankrupting them, and they're going to lose everything, and they're going to keep trying to manipulate the market, just like Sam Bankman-Fried and Caroline Ellison. But eventually, just like all gamblers and people using leverage, they're going to lose everything. They're going to end up with no power over the market whatsoever. As more and more people buy Bitcoin and take it out of the exchanges, they put it into their own wallet, they set it aside for 10, 20, 30 years into the future, the price of Bitcoin keeps rising and rising and rising. As long as more and more people keep learning about Bitcoin, the price can go up forever. You have to remember that there are 21 million Bitcoin, there are 8 billion people on Earth, there are infinity US dollars, and what this means is that the price can go up forever. I'll link those hodl wave charts in the description below. I think they're extremely valuable if you ever feel like you're losing hope in where Bitcoin is going. The best guidance that I can give you here is that you're probably going to be much better off over the next few decades if you simply study Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin, and hold.